Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalist of East Tennessee. I'm Joe Barnhart. Welcome.
And I'm Larry Rhodes. We want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find a large free-thinking and atheist or agnostic community, and this is a show for them, and curious people are about living a life free of supernatural beliefs. Today we're going to discuss reason and theology, a better boat, truth as sold by religion.
Now, this is a call-in show, so if you would, pick up your phone, see the number on the screen there, and call us. We would appreciate your comments and questions, and also we'll give you our email later on. Take up your pen, if you would.
After the show tonight, the cast and crew, are going down to the meetup down at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria. It's an Atheist Society of Knoxville meetup, or an happy hour, for food, drink, and conversation. Look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table.
Yeah, the activities of the Rationalist of East Tennessee often have guest lecturers and discussions. One is called The Bible Tells Me So. That's April the 13th. And it's the politics of biblical interpretation.
I think it says the 3rd on here.
No, the 3rd, yeah. I didn't have my glasses. The 3rd. That's coming up soon. And the other one is on the 17th, and that's The Age of Empathy, Nature's Lessons for a Kinder Society. And then they're going to talk about unions, why we need unions. This is another adventure in the notion of community.
Be sure to visit our websites for additional details, including times and locations. The websites for Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee are on the top of the screen. Jot them down if you have a moment. Do you have out-of-town friends who might want to watch their program, our program? Mm-hmm. Now they can. Send them to ctvknox.org. You see it above my head here. Yeah. Scroll down about one page. You'll see a purple viewing area over here. And it will start promptly at 5 o'clock every Tuesday. Now, before we get into our program, I'd like to take just a minute or two to reply to the last caller from the last week's show. Today is the 29th, so that would have been March 22nd. Neither Lee nor I got a chance to respond to her story since we ran out of time, so I plan to respond to it now. There were so many things wrong in that call that it'd take me a minute or two to address them all. Minutes we didn't have last week as we ran out of time. She called within the last minutes of the show, last 8 minutes thereby, and gave us an 8-minute story. It could be that she didn't want us to have time to be able to answer the question at the time. I don't know. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. But let's just say it was by chance. An atheist is one who doesn't believe in gods or that gods are real. And she starts off by saying that she was an atheist. There used to be. Many Christian apologists say that, and it really irks me. Just as in those cases, it comes clear that as she went along in her story that she wasn't an atheist at all. Is this just another case of a good lie that we spoke about last time? She had clinical... I think I'm missing a page here.
That's all right. Well, let's go on. The topic is what? Reason?
I haven't...
Oh, go ahead.
Anyway... I'll address this one more in a minute. She said that at one point she felt like taking her own life. And we asked her why. She said, I just didn't think it was that great. She had kids. She was at school. But she was willing to kill herself and orphan her small children because she didn't think it was that great. An atheist believes that this is the only life we have, and to throw that away and orphan her children just because it wasn't that great does not ring true. She said that when she was in the deepest of depressions, her friend comes and talks to her about God, and during that time she feels physically ill, and that she noticed that atheists generally do feel ill when talking about God. Maybe she is suggesting that the demon of atheism is writhing inside our body whenever God is brought up in the conversation. Maybe she is trying to appeal to people who believe in demons. Think about it. We're atheists on the show, and we talk about God all the time. And then she says that night she decided to turn everything over to Jesus. Excuse me. How can that be? She said that she was an atheist. An atheist believes that if Jesus actually existed at all, he would just be another religious leader, a natural person. Why would an atheist turn to Jesus in a crisis? This is just the kind of story that is designed to appeal to people who are already believers, people who also don't believe that there are atheists in foxholes. She said when she turned everything over to Jesus that it made all the difference and her life immediately got better. How? She had clinical depression. Did she suddenly get cured? How did that change the fact that it was her, not Jesus, who still had to care for her children? Jesus wasn't going to do the laundry, feed the kids, or work for a living, or take her college courses for her. This is a typical witnessing story that are shared among believers to help bolster them in times of trial. It may or may not have any basis in reality, but what gets me is how she misrepresents atheism. Ask yourself why a person who doesn't believe in God, Jesus, angels, ghosts, or generally anything supernatural could suddenly dump the rational basis for their worldview and suddenly believe these fantastic stories in the hope that it would help them out of their troubles. However, to the believers who share this type of story, it helps support their vision of the world and their view of atheists as people who just say they don't believe when they really do. End of commentary.
Okay, thank you. Well, the topic is reason and theology, and it's raised the question. Most of us understand in general what reason is, and most of us practice reason in various areas of our lives. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. It takes reason just to drive a car, or to turn on a dishwashing machine, or to wash the dishes. Mm-hmm. What is reason? It's not a thing. It's a process. And I want to raise a question, see what you think, and maybe you can call in and deal with this. Could I hold to some beliefs that don't make sense and still be a rational person? I want to argue that I can.
You're talking about irrational dichotomies?
Yeah, well, what I want to say, I've held to things that later on I thought were mistaken.
Mm-hmm. But you didn't continue believing the first thing after you found the second thing.
Sometimes I found out that I have continued to believe things, but I didn't know that they were mistaken. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is we can all do hold to things that probably don't make sense until our friends or neighbors can point out some of our inconsistencies. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we have views that don't quite fit together, but we don't have any better alternative. And so we say, mm-hmm. this is the best we can do mm-hmm. until we can get better insight. And what I'm saying is most of us don't overthrow all of our beliefs all at once. And that would be foolish, like jumping out of a boat into the waves. Mm-hmm. We change our minds by piecemeal. We inherit beliefs. Most of the beliefs we inherit from our parents make sense. Some of them don't. And my father said he inherited some beliefs that did not make sense. Mm-hmm. And so we all learn to make some revisions. We act on our inherited beliefs, and sometimes we pay a dear price. Sometimes we observe other people making actions on these beliefs and see the mistake, and we learn from their mistakes. Mm-hmm. And that's part
the smart ones do.
Yeah, well, we hope that sometimes we are smart. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, my mother used to say, you don't have to bump your head along the wall mm-hmm. 4 or 5 times to learn that it hurts. Mm-hmm. And some of us are a little slow at times to learn. So we also have beliefs that we discover don't fit with each other.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah,
holding two beliefs in your mind that contradict each other at the same time.
And we've all discovered we have done that in our lives mm-hmm. on various things, and we learn somehow to make revisions. Also, to be rational, I think, means to be empirical. That is to say, you not only hold to the belief or the expectation, but you test it in the real world. Mm-hmm. And that's what's meant by empirical. In fact, if you're a scientist, you try to set up experiments and try to refute your theory. Mm-hmm. And
ask everybody else to, too.
Yeah.
Because you want the truth. You don't really want your theory to go ahead. You want the truth to go ahead.
Yeah, you just don't want to pile up evidence to support it. You also want to try to test it to see if it does stand the test.
Right. That's called falsifiability.
Yeah, falsifiability. And if you can't do that, well, in some ways, if we are paranoid, we can't ever falsify it. For example, if I drop a pencil and you pick it up for me, and if I'm paranoid, I'd say, you think I can't do that for myself? You see, nothing you do for me will count as being
Positive.
a good deed, because I can't correct my false assumption there. And then one other thing I'd like to suggest is part of being rational is to have an imagination. That is to say, when something doesn't work or doesn't fit, we try to dream up a better solution. And whether we're driving a car and thinking, or at home, or somewhere else, or we borrow, we try to dream up better solutions.
Or theorize.
Now, plumbers do this, electricians do it. All of us try to do it every day. Without imagination, there wouldn't be very much rational thinking of it. So you got consistency, empirical testing, and imagination to coming up with better explanations.
The testing could be the most important. Well, the imagination probably is the most important part of it. But if you test it and it doesn't work, then you have to throw that concept out.
Yeah.
Even if it works for you and you give it to your friends and they try it in the same situation, then it doesn't work. Then you've got to seriously question it and keep testing with it. That's part of the scientific method. Peer review. You want to work up something like, well, we had cold fusion here recently,
right?
And they released their theory maybe a little bit too early because it couldn't be duplicated in other laboratories. So we went back to the original laboratories and tried to get it there, and apparently they had trouble, so they scratched that theory off. Now, there are changes to that theory. People have made amendments to it and changes to it, and they're testing it again, and they're getting some decent results, I understand. But nothing to publish yet, so they're holding off on it, especially after the debacle of the first publication. But
would you agree that science ought to make us humble in the sense of not so arrogant? It makes us see how little we know sometimes.
It does, and that's the thing that drives us, what we don't know. It's not what we do know.
Good point.
That would just keep us at home. And you're talking about religion or reason versus theology. The theologian starts with his knowledge that he has already branded, stamped as truth, like the Bible. This is truth. What can I find in the nature of the world to support this? If it doesn't support it or match it or in any way help it out in its theory, then they disregard it. Like Copernican solar system, the Earth-centered solar system held sway for the longest time because the theologians thought that matched what their Bible says. And when Galileo came along and said, no, that's not right, they imprisoned him in his home for the last 15 years of his life, even though it was demonstrably correct. That's a problem that we have between reason and theology, is just where they start their search. The theologian starts with his Bible, and theoretically the Word of God, and moves to nature. The scientist starts with nature and accepts the facts that prove themselves through testing.
You might be able to make a case that theologians have inherited views, just as we have inherited views, and then they discover that there are several views and they don't fit together. And you can see a reasoning process among theologians, I would argue. They make revisions. For example, you had among Christians the notion that God came to earth in flesh. And so you have various theories that they imagined to try to explain that. One of which was the Arian view, which was a view later declared as heresy. A heretic is someone who didn't have enough politics to back up.
Didn't win the doctrine battles.
Political. But the Arian view says that Jesus was not God, he was Lord in heaven with God, but was not God and came to earth. See, what they were trying to do is deal with a problem, is how can a being be both God and man? And so the Arians tried to say, well, he's not God. He's
also because they didn't want a polytheistic religion. They wanted a monotheistic religion. And for monotheism, you can't have more than one God. You think about it, anybody who controls the universe, controls nature, magically can convert one element into another or change the weather or whatever, bury fossils, would have the power of a God. But, they can't say Satan is God. He's one of the fallen angels. Angels theoretically have magical powers too, but they can't say he's a god. Yeah. They're gods. Jesus, not a god, but he is the God, which is strange.
Elaine Pagels is a theologian or biblical scholar who has traced the history of the development of the concept of Satan, and she shows, I think convincingly, that in, say, the book of Job, he is not what later became Satan in the Middle Ages, but a cosmic being in heaven who is like a prosecuting attorney. And then you can see by imagination theories developing on this.
But when a holy man has a theory, it's revelation. It's not his word, it's God's word coming through him. Theoretically.
In fact, there was a problem, and even as early as one of the epistles of John, is they had to have a rule, test the spirits. In other words, they had too many revelations. And so when you've got too many, then you've got the question, well, which one's the real McCoy? Which one isn't? How do you test them? Then that seemingly gets an independent test.
Even John Smith, the way he told his wife that he was going to have other wives was, it was revealed unto me by the Almighty God. That's how he told her. And so anything that a prophet or anybody who calls themselves a prophet, a holy man, wants to make the word of God, all he has to do is preface it with that line, and all of a sudden it's ready for his own chapter in the Bible.
How do you think Freud would deal with that theory? He would say maybe that revelation came from the id, from the id kid, rather.
I'd say it comes from the conscious in a lot of cases, premeditated.
Let me give you another example, if I may, in theology, how on the question of Jesus being God on earth, and yet fully man, fully God. That was one of the theories of it, fully God, fully man. So did he have a divine nature or a human nature? And so you had the Christians dividing on that. The Nestorians had these two natures. The Monophysites said one nature. Mono means one, the physis means physics, just one nature, one nature. And there you have what I'm suggesting is people, see, I'm a humanist, and I think I want to see humans at work among these religious people, trying to solve their problems with their presuppositions and their theories. Now, what most of us realize, and theologians often too, is sometimes your overall theory simply breaks down. You make so many revisions that after a while...
To support the areas you want to push.
That you load your ship with so many guns, you sink your own boat. And I think that's what happened among some of these theologians. They simply sank their own boat.
Is that what you were talking about when you were saying building a better boat? For today's topic.
In other words, most of us try to say, here's our boat, and we're building also another boat, and trying to...
You're talking about...
in case one starts sinking, you got another one. And in other words, you're trying to always say, we're trying to explain things better, always trying to make better theories.
It's like the prophets who prophesied doomsday, like 2 years from now, and then the day comes and goes away, and they have to revisit that and rework it up and redo all their numbers to explain why it didn't happen, which has happened many times in the past. Just about every decade has it, the doomsayers.
Oh yeah, the Millerites in the 19th century, who sold their goods and gathered on the hillside.
And Jehovah's Witnesses, how many times did they prophesize it?
Well, they've had to make some revisions. In fact, there's a very, very good book on this by a former Jehovah's Witness. Let's go ahead. You had another point you wanted to make, right?
When when I read a Christian definition of faith last week, which incorporated courage, Forrest said apparently they wanted to co-opt the positive thing of another word and wield it into their own otherwise empty word. We were talking about faith last week, and we were talking about faith will allow you to stand up in front of people and talk, and if you don't have faith, it could actually cost you your life. You might die from it. So we were talking about it, and I was saying, all you need to do is stand up in front of people and talk is courage. So they're taking their word and stealing the definition from another word, saying, this is our word. This is how it works.
The meaning of a word isn't fixed in the stars. It's the way people use it. And some people will take a word like faith, and that's okay as long as you know how they're using it.
Right.
And sometimes it does mean for example, I have faith in my wife, but not as an airplane pilot.
Right. Or I have faith that the sun is going to come up tomorrow, but it's not a religious faith. It's not a faith in things that are not physically possible.
And would you concede that maybe someday the sun won't come up, but probably not in your lifetime?
No, I hope not. But it's a reasonable expectation when you use faith in the everyday word, everyday language.
I like that, a reasonable expectation rather than a blind faith.
Right. When you're talking about religious faith, you're talking about a blind faith in that not only does it go forward without any evidence, it goes forward even in the face of evidence to the contrary.
In fact, you don't have to be religious to do that sometimes.
No, that's true.
I mean, we've all had blind faith. And I don't want to get into the position to say that everybody who is religious has blind faith in all areas of their life. That would not be empirically accurate. That would be like saying everybody's an atheist is wicked. So you got two extremes here.
There's no gray area in there.
Let me give an example of how consistency operates in thinking in the field of religion. Let's take the story of Noah and the flood. Now, according to the book of Genesis, around the 6th chapter, God got very angry with the human race and regretted, notice the word regretted and grieved, according to some translations, that he had made man and the animals, apparently, and went into what can only be described, it seems to me, into a murderous rage. Now, you can patch it up with other words, but when you obliterate, decimate, exterminate most of the human race, then that has to be close to insanity.
Or animalism.
Now, what's interesting to me is that some ministers on television want to say the Bible is the moral standard. Now, let's think a minute. Let's suppose you took that story of Noah to be serious history. This means that the creator of the universe, presumably who knew all the future, knew that he would make a universe in which most of the human race would be exterminated by himself.
And doomed to hellfire.
Furthermore, all the women that were pregnant, see, these are those anti-pro-choice preachers now, are saying that the Lord God drowned not only the women, but the children.
Babies and animals and livestock and everything.
Now, most theologians I know don't take that story to be literal history. They can see it's too filled with contradictions. Do we have a call in? Let's call it. Oh, good.
Welcome to Freethought Forum. Can we get a name or a nickname?
Please, go ahead.
Yes, this is Shara.
Shara.
I noticed that your topic today is reason versus theology, building a better boat. And yet you seem to be concentrating strictly on the biblical boats versus the rational boats. Perhaps it would be good if you could describe how other cultures in the world, all the different societies, have dealt with building better boats according to their own cultural reasoning, and how that differs from the biblical positions.
Oh, good.
What they have in difference and what they have in common.
Yeah. Okay. You want to deal with that, or the anthropologists?
Well, I was going to talk about the scientific method, but if you'd like to talk about the anthropological.
What we've discovered from anthropologists and culturologists is that all cultures are trying to solve practical problems. Those cultures that don't do that don't live to tell the truth. I mean, they simply die off. So they build a lot of practical common sense, say on boat building, if they're on the shores, on how. And now they may have ceremonies to go through, and they may have their superstitions to go with it, but they know how to build the boats.
They have to deal with warring factions. They have to deal with changes in weather and crop failures, shortages in food. Many times they'll create stories, fantastic stories sometimes, to explain the problems that they're having and bring the society that they're working with back together.
In fact, that's a good cultural theory, that these myths that they create in stories, we have to keep in mind they had only the tools and the theories of their time and their situation. Right. And they, like we are doing, did the best they could. And most of the theories were somewhat anthropomorphic. They often had gods or witches or ghosts and spirits, because that's the way they thought. And they wove together these theories, and even within the theories, they had to have some consistency.
Right.
Otherwise,
they wouldn't be believed.
Exactly.
Also, you have to take there are some people in the society who would be willing to weave these stories for their own benefit, as well as bringing the society together to elevate themselves politically in the society. When you get a large population that's willing to believe fantastic stories about the world, and how could they believe anything else because they did not know? Then you get people who are willing to spin fantastic stories and take advantage of that situation. So that's rise of theologians.
That's a good point.
The earliest.
You'd only have religion.
Witch doctors and things.
But how it's used. In other words, you can turn a religion, or a science for that matter, into a tool and use it for good or ill.
Who was it who was Lashchenko or something in Russia, in communist Russia, who had a way of growing crops that he thought was better than the evolution explained. And he pushed it through at the point of the sword, basically, to be able to prop himself up as the leader in this area. And the resulting food shortage killed millions of people.
It did. Yeah, the communist hierarchy at that time simply bought into it, and didn't. They had what they called a theory of evolution, but it wasn't a Darwinian theory of evolution, and they could not falsify it.
But he used his level of power just to prop it up and claim it worked, even though it didn't, and it paid off badly in the long run.
Yeah, power is not a test for truth.
Right.
I mean, sometimes when we get power, we think it is, but it isn't.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Shira, for calling in, getting us back on track. Appreciate that. Sometimes we certainly need it.
Well, she has a very good point. All cultures are see, we are a curious species. I think you could make a case that the human infant learns a language mainly because, now not solely, but mainly because this infant is curious. Now, it's not born with a language and has to learn it. And I think what's called motherese, baby talk, is a major contribution into the development of...
We still understand it.
Yeah. Well, mothers make you could make a case that this is the big difference between the human species and, say, some of the other primates, is that motherese constantly programming this child, and the child's learning partly because he's genetically very curious.
Well, Dr. Jane Goodall might take exception to that. She might think that they all do it in their own language, in their own way. But
I would say that the human language is so far different from animal language that there is no...
Well, yeah, their vocabulary is mountainous compared to theirs. Okay, well, thank you, Shira.
We are a storytelling species, would you think? Yeah.
Certainly.
Oh.
Oh.
It's off, yeah.
Okay. We have a segment in the program that we do a mid-program break. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee and individual contributions. And this week we would like to thank FLE for his support. You can send us feedback at the email address on your screen.
Oh, yes.
freethoughtforum@yahoo.com. But do not wait. This is a call-in show. We are live today, and call in at 215-2288. The Atheist Society of Knoxville meets several times every month, a couple times a week sometimes, and we meet up for food and drink. And just visit the ASK website on the screen for further times and locations.
What, do you have the Rationalist website there?
Yes, the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
What is it? Rationalist.
Rationalist.org. It's on the top of the screen here.
Oh, good.
They have Sunday activities involving lively presentations and discussions of subjects, topical and timeless, such as what every atheist should know about the Bible, what is art, transhumanism, the evolutionary history of flowers, and thinking rationally about climate change. Once a month they get together for a book club. Past books they've read are The God Delusion, American Age of Unreason, The Virtue of Selfishness, Wither Socialism, and Your Inner Fish, which we all want to know about. At the recent social get-together, we also had some fun food. We were visited by the flying spaghetti monster cookies, much tastier than a dry cracker that you would get from competing religions, if you consider atheism religion. If you're really fast, you can write down the recipe, but you can email us, if you aren't, at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com and request the flying spaghetti monster recipe on the screen, and we will try to give it to you, the email address again before the end of the show. In the news, if you'd like to go into that again.
Go ahead. I don't have my glasses on.
The RET Book Club selections, starting in May, running through October, meet at 4 o'clock on the second Sunday of every month. They are Irreligion, 12 by 12, The Moral Landscape, Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, Religion and Science by Bertrand Russell, and The Grand Design by Stephen Hawkins. We also want to mention that there's an essay contest for free-thinking students. The Freedom from Religion Foundation has 3 categories with scholarship prizes for up to $2,000 each. The topics of the college-bound high school seniors are the harm of religion, or the harm of religion to women. Entrants may write about the harm of religion from a historical, psychological, or topical perspective, or about the harm of religion to women, why women need freedom from religion. Visit ffrf.org and navigate to Outreach and Events, then the link to Students Scholarship Essay Contest to see the topics for other categories.
Can we get back to the question our caller raised about other cultures? Other cultures have dealt with the problem of how did the universe begin. They have creation stories.
Where did we come from?
Where we come from, how the human species began.
Why we're here.
Yeah. And in short, because we are such a curious species.
Those are good questions.
These are questions they could not avoid. For one thing, we're a species. We may not be the only one, but we certainly know that we die. And in fact, someone was telling me the other day, a 4-year-old was asking about someone who had died, and the 4-year-old said, will I be dead? In other words, we're the kind of species that has to deal with these kind of questions. And so every culture that we know of has had to deal with the death question. And in the Buddhist tradition, you have one strain of Buddhism that simply says that we don't go on. Others say, well, part of our tradition goes on.
Or we come back as something else entirely.
Oh, yeah, have reincarnation, which is... And then you have the notion of going on forever and ever, which always seems to me to be a strange notion. Imagine living 400,000 years. I think we've got a caller.
400 trillion years. I mean, forever is.
Yeah, we've got a caller. Let's hear what we have. Please.
Welcome to Freethought Forum.
Well, hello, this is Faithless Forrest. I'm sorry I can't be with you guys today, but I've been anxious to ask a question about the building a better boat, leaving faith. And I was wondering, I grew up faithless, and so I never had to make the choice. But for people who are leaving their faith, there's a cultural aspect to it. So, for instance, there's even dietary things. So, if you guys, maybe in your experience with members of the Rationalists of East Tennessee or the Atheist Society of Knoxville, talked about, moving beyond cultural, getting into a different cultural boat. And, for instance, Hindus don't eat any meat. But, I do know of a Hindu who after coming to America, began to eat meat. He assimilated, and he described it as a very difficult process.
Okay. You want to deal with that? I've got an interesting story on that.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I have a friend who came from India, and she was going through the supermarket with some beef in her basket, and some of her friends from India saw her and gave her what she thought
was a hard time.
Was not a hard time, but a strange look. And part of our job, if you're a humanist, is try to understand other people's culture. I'm glad the caller came in on this. Let's imagine you are in a society in which, in fact, I know of a medical doctor who claims he was in a society like this visiting, where they ate and cooked rats.
Okay, yeah, that would be challenging for me.
For Western civilization.
It would make me a little squeamish because of my cultural background.
Or dogs and cats.
Yeah, and then some of our American natives ate certain kinds of dogs. So that way, rather than being contemptuous of the people from India, we can identify them as fellow humans who are squeamish about giving up some of their culture, just as we are. I mean, I don't think if I were starving, I would, of course, eat a rat if it were cooked real well. But I would really have to be starving and no hope for anything else.
Right. But you wouldn't expect them at the same time to force their mores for eating rats or dogs or whatever on the rest of the society by legal means.
Oh, no.
A lot of times nowadays we see the religious right trying to do exactly that. Making it illegal to work on Sunday, to sell tools on Sunday, alcohol, things like that, because of their religious mores and their religious beliefs.
Yeah, what's interesting is in the Baptist tradition, that church-state separation was a major doctrine until they were hijacked by the Falwellians and others. In fact, they fought hard for separation. So that religion,
so that another religion wouldn't take over their bailiwick, come in and try to control them.
It's a sad thing. Sometimes minority groups, when they get power, forget they were a minority group and don't develop a principle of respect for all.
Right.
Well, all right. Well, so with respect to building a better boat, I guess we might have greater freedom, some of which we don't even appreciate at first.
Yeah. In fact, part of boat building is by studying other cultures and interacting with people from other cultures, we discover that we can learn from others. We for one thing, we got cars from Japan.
We
didn't invent cars, but they invented a better way to run one.
Yeah.
And in other words, cross-culture is like cross-breeding. There are some big advantages to that.
It always has been. That's why one of the benefits of the trade routes that they used to have and commerce in general, since the dawn of civilization.
Yeah, you could make a case that international trade like that can be a very civilizing influence. Amazing.
Because if we know foreigners and their ways, we maybe won't demonize them like we have in the past, or it won't hopefully be so easy for our leaders to demonize them.
Exactly. Right. That's why I think that in the universities, the study of other people's religions is crucial. Because, let's say in Iran, religion is so tied up with the politics and the rest of the society, of the culture, that if you don't understand that religion, then you're not going to understand the culture and how to deal with the people.
True.
And
I would hope some other listeners might call in and tell us about how their culture is different, even merely beyond the religious aspects, and maybe we might learn about some interesting foods that we would like to have.
Sure.
I know that the Islamic faith breaks Ramadan with some traditional foods, a few of which I've had that are mighty yummy, and maybe we could get a caller to call in and tell us about that. I'm going to say bye, guys.
Okay, thanks, Forrest.
Like pomegranate, what, from Persia?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You can click them off there. Well, one of the things that I'd like to think that many of the societies, if not all societies in the world now, have in common is the scientific method. They built their societies and their technology and the communications networks and stuff based on the revelations that have come to light because of the scientific method. I've got a little story here that talks about what it's actually like, developing a simple theory by the scientific method. Start with an observation that evokes a question. This will only take about 30 seconds.
Sure.
Broth spoils when I leave it out a couple of days. Why? Using logic and previous knowledge, state a possible answer called a hypothesis. Well, I hypothesize that tiny organisms floating in the air must fall into the broth and start reproducing. Or from the religious standpoint, you might say that tiny demons get into the broth and spoil it, or we can't drink it.
Yeah.
Making it so that we can't. You can perform an experiment. After boiling some broth, which would kill any that are already in there, any tiny organism, divide it into 2 containers, one covered, one not covered, place them on the table for 2 days, and see if one spoils. And find out that only the uncovered broth spoils. Then publish your findings in peer-reviewed journals. Only the broth that is exposed to air after 2 days tend to spoil. The covered specimen did not. Other scientists read your experiment and try to duplicate it. Verification. Every scientist who tries your experiment comes up with the same results. They try other methods to make sure your experiment was measuring what it was supposed to. Again, they get the same results. In time, if experiments continue to support your hypothesis, it becomes a theory. Microorganisms from the air cause broth to spoil. Mm-hmm. However, from the religious side, you might try the experiment using holy water and leaving it open. Holy water in one, regular water in the other. If it spoils, if both of them spoil, it can't be demons, since demons can't get into anything. They can get into anything, but they can't live in holy water. So it must be microscopic organisms floating in the air to contaminate and spoil the broth.
Let me ask you a question, see what you think. If you get on a plane, would you get on a plane if it were piloted by a Methodist?
If he was a good pilot.
I
or
like
she.
That, yeah. In other words, it would be, you don't ask the religion of the person. You want to know if they
have the technical expertise to perform their job.
Okay, now let's suppose the guy were an atheist. Would that guarantee that he's a good pilot?
No.
Nope. So rationality has to be dealt with in specifics more than the general.
Right.
I know plenty of people who are theists that are rational in a lot of their lives.
They just don't apply the rationality to that particular compartment of their
and I know atheists the same way, who have areas in which they're not as rational as I think they could be.
We're all human, no matter what we believe.
Yeah, and that's why, as a humanist, I'm trying to say, let's build bridges with people on where we sometimes need to agree on profound things. I can give you an example. A group of evangelical psychologists once had me to come to speak to them on forgiveness. Now, I thought that was kind of interesting. And I learned from them, and they learned from me. One of them had a very tragic thing. I won't go into it. But he really needed forgiveness for what he did. Now, I'm not trying to get into the theology of forgiveness. But they were they were evangelical psychologists and wanted to learn. And also, I was not an evangelical. I had grown up an evangelical. And then, therefore, I knew justification by faith and had appreciation of where they were coming
what did you come away from that with? What is your current thoughts on the doctrine of forgiveness?
Well, that all cultures have to have forgiveness. It's a simple thing that you don't learn from preachers primarily.
Right.
You learn from mothers and fathers when they're raising siblings. One sibling is maltreating another. The other one holds a grudge, probably with good reason until he's got evidence to see there's been a change.
Right.
And then the mother is teaching, once the changes come about, then you establish a better relationship.
Yeah. Well, the problem I have with, I agree with your take on it. The problem I have with like Christian forgiveness or doctrinalized religious forgiveness is that you don't go to the person that you wronged to get forgiveness. You go to somebody else. And Christopher Hitchens always says it doesn't do Peter much good if I pay the money that I stole from him to Paul and ask him to forgive me. You know, like, which is what happens in the Catholic Church and other churches. You go out, you do wrongs, you go to the church, you give the church your money and ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, there's oddly enough in the New
problem.
In the New Testament, the passage says before you go to court, go to the person you wronged. And that's
right. Go to the person you wronged, ask for forgiveness, and if you get it, then you can both continue on your life. Right. But it doesn't help Peter to ask forgiveness.
Going to someone else to get it is passing the buck.
Right.
It's and I remember telling someone I think who was burdened with a lot of guilt and kept going over and over the guilt, and I said, you are actually using guilt as an excuse for solving the problem. It's easier to baptize yourself into this guilt program. I mean, I said, now what you did is you deserve to be calling yourself guilty. You did something wrong. But to make a specialty of your guilt.
To live nothing but that.
Is it? So I put a guilt trip on guilt. That's what it amounts to. Yeah. And she saw through it.
Does guilt squared.
Yeah, she had enough sense to see what was going on.
Yeah. This is a call-in show. We have about 11 minutes left in the show. Please call 215-2288 with your comments and or questions. Do you have anything else that you'd like to bring up toward the end of the show?
Oh, yes. I want to deal with the question of multi-cultures. Cultures often continue by not continuing. Let me explain. They continue to survive by making some changes, sometimes radical changes, in order to survive.
Right.
So all cultures are both liberal and conservative. Now, let me explain, if you would.
Sure.
We are conservative in the sense, in a culture, in that we try to keep the values and the beliefs that we inherit because they have been working somewhat. But then we discover that sometimes they don't, and we make revisions.
They make life worse in several areas.
So the liberal aspect is to venture out, to try to better, and then if it is better, to try to share it liberally. So both liberalism and conservatism is a part of common sense, in that sense, a culture, common consensus.
Slavery might be a good point there. The country that we had before the Civil War was literally tearing itself apart, and it eventually did in the Civil War. We had to come to grips with the badness of slavery, the terrible state of the civilization that would allow slaves and people to be treated that way in their own society. And we had to make some changes, and they were very, very painful changes, but the country did continue on.
Yeah. Well, that's a good example. I had a history teacher who said that he heard, when he was in college, a man say, "I still wonder if the Negro has a soul." Now what the soul meant, we'll put that aside right now. He was trying to say if the Negro or the American African American was really of the same human nature. Now,
or was even human.
Yeah, it was really human.
And this particular line of thought was backed up by the Bible. Prior to Civil War, many preachers preached the fact that slavery was in the Bible and it was a God-given right from one man to own another one.
It's in the flood story that I just referred to. Mm-hmm. When Noah landed in this story, 8 of them were on the boat. Mm-hmm. The rest of the population
was dead.
Noah's son saw him naked. Mm-hmm. Now, this was after he had invented apparently wine, and maybe was naked and drunk. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say that the son had done anything bad, just maybe it happened to see him naked and told his brother. Well, this made Noah angry, and he pronounced a curse in this story on the son and basically on the grandkids, which again is...
Yeah, it's another bad doctrine of...
Vicious,
that you inherit the sins of your fathers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's... Now, what I'm saying is, here you have biblical morality that we know is not moral.
Right.
But the racist had quoted this passage of the Bible to justify it. So what we're saying is, the Bible there has an awful lot, or whether you got the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads or the Quran or the Book of Mormon, you still have to have people interpreting it and using the material in it.
And copying it and making changes to it over a decade or millennia. Anyway, there are many people who call evolution a theory and say that's not, it's just the theory. Well, generally what they're doing is just making assertions. God is real, heaven is real, hell is real, with no evidence, no theory behind it. That's just a flat assertion because the Bible says it. But I'd like to talk just a second or go into what a hypothesis versus a theory.
Good.
A hypothesis is an educated guess based on an observation. Mm-hmm. It's a rational explanation of a single event or phenomena based on what is observed, but which has not been proved. Most hypotheses can be supported or refuted by experimentation or continued observation. Now, that's just a hypothesis. We have those every day. They pop into our mind. My car doesn't open. It must be stuck on this corner over here. That's a hypothesis. It could be that your coat tail was hanging out and it's stuck at the bottom. A theory, though, is what one or more hypotheses become once they have been verified and accepted as true. A theory is an explanation of a set of related observations or events based upon proven hypothesis and verified multiple times by detached groups of researchers. Unfortunately, even some scientists often use the term theory in a more colloquial sense when they really mean hypothesis. This makes what makes its true meaning in science even more confusing to the general public. But just wanted to go into that for a little bit because there's so many people that say evolution is just a theory. What they really mean is just a hypothesis. But it's not. It really is a scientific theory that explains a lot.
Well, what they were saying is a theory, what you're saying, a theory is a very complex thing, is referring to or purports to refer to reality. And some theories may refer and may not. And I think what they're saying, here's a theory that doesn't refer to reality. Well, that's where I would disagree with them. And that's what they're saying. But I read the other day of a man say, give me one fact that the theory of evolution has... and what he didn't grasp is that the theory of evolution is a whole network of theories and a framework
that have been
interpreting these.
That have been tested over 150 years now.
Yeah, it's the best. Let me give you an example. How do you explain the suffering of animals if you're a theist? You see, here you have in the story of the flood, this God character destroying the animals. Now, it was that punishment, you see. He seemingly regretted he made the animals.
Collateral damage.
Collateral damage, like as in a war. Now, my question is, it's a big problem for a theologian, a big problem to explain the suffering of animals. See, they have a theory that human suffering is because of an Adam and Eve, now most theologians I know don't take the Adam and Eve story to be literal history anymore.
Right.
Evangelicals do, or most of them, not all of them, and some Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm suggesting is that a naturalistic view has a better way of accounting for the suffering of animals, because we don't start with a theory that the universe was made perfect without any pain in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Or that God isn't watching over every sparrow, that type of thing. There's a wasp that lays its eggs inside a caterpillar. Now, you got a wasp and a caterpillar, both special creations of God, and He theoretically watches over both of them. But then the wasp lays its eggs inside the caterpillar, which then hatch and eat the caterpillar while it's still alive. That's not very fair for the caterpillar, and a lot of suffering involved, you would think.
Well, if the caterpillar has any feelings, there'd be a lot of suffering. You and I certainly have eggs apparently in us, the viruses.
Yeah.
And we
you can touch a caterpillar and it will move away from the stimulus, so you would think that it would have a good nervous system, or at least a rudimentary one. Anyway, so that's a problem for the theologians.
It's a big problem. It's called the problem of theodicy.
Mm-hmm. Oops.
If you, we dealt a little with the problem of suffering in a previous program, and from a naturalistic point of view or humanistic point of view, the assumption is, and I think we could make a good case for it, is suffering wherever you have feeling creatures, you simply have suffering, and that's part of the natural situation. Nobody designed it so that it would be free of all pain.
Many times the suffering is not only self-inflicted accidentally, but from illnesses, which don't involve any other creatures.
No.
I mean, you can be born with an illness or a condition that causes you a lot of pain before you actually die. Where would the theologians talk about that one? A lot of times they say that if you lose a loved one, that's actually building your character more, because you're learning to deal with loss. But it doesn't do much for the one that you lost.
Yeah, like Job losing his family, and so he gets another one, but it forgets
about the same family.
That's a pretty cruel viewpoint, it seems to me.
It is. We're getting down to about the last minute and a half of the show. Time to start wrapping things up. Was there anything last thing that you'd like to?
I'd like to encourage the people, if they have a chance, to go to the rationalist meeting at the Pellissippi State College at the cafeteria there, and they have a wonderful parking place.
That's right. There's plenty of parking.
And every Sunday morning.
Usually they have a presenter that will come in from the university. It's usually a doctorate or some other type of educator that will bring material with them to discuss for the edification of all.
And they sometimes meet in homes to have discussions, so it's a very interesting group.
And don't forget that we're going down to Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria after the show. That's in the Old City for food, drink, conversation. You're welcome to show up and meet us all. You can reach us at Freethought Forum at yahoo.com. If you need to send us questions for the show, we can either answer them on the show or off the show. You can call this station and purchase a DVD of this or previous programs by calling 215-8848. The number on the screen. Did you have something?
Oh, just wanted to encourage people to stay with us and meet with us every
Tuesday.
week.
Remember, it's an hour-long show now. Starts at 5 o'clock instead of 5:30, and we'll be here every Tuesday.
I appreciate your call.
This has been Freethought Forum. I'm Larry.
And I'm Joe.
And we'd like to thank our cameraman Sam and Jonas for our technical